Hi everyone, Jason Crean here, and we are coming to you from the Biodiversity Bird Blends Shop and Avian Education Center in Oviedo, Florida, right outside of Orlando. And I'm very excited today because I have my co-conspirator, my co-PI from the Animal Nutrition Lab at Saint Xavier University, Dr. Tatiana Tatum.
Hi.
Thank you for being here. We have been talking a long time about the focus of the research projects that will be launching or have launched at this point at the university, and we have a particular interest in avian nutrition.
Okay.
And one of the reasons for that is there's not a lot of avian nutrition research, especially that's not biased, that's put out by universities that don't have a commercial focus, I guess you could say. And that's one of the reasons why we started Biodiversity Bird Blends, and you can read that on every bag, is to help fund research, because it's really difficult to get research around how to better feed our birds. So we just thought we'd do this today, do a little talk. Recently you were at the American Chemical Society's conference.
Correct, in San Diego.
And presented on some preliminary work that we've been doing at the university, along with our chemistry professor colleagues, around acrylamide and some other potentially harmful compounds that are found in ultra-processed foods. And there's a lot of talk about ultra-processed foods right now, particularly because of their effects on humans and the, I would say, national health crisis when it comes to even children all the way up, when it comes to the effects of processed foods on our health. And so this is a focus that we wanted to approach and start looking at what really is in bird food that's not on labels, and what effects that can have.
Right. Yeah, so one of the great things is we're having a chance to look at it right now. No external funding that is biasing the research. We're just able to look at the compounds that are in the bird food. There is, like you just said, not a lot of research that is being done on small animal feed, on bird feed, because that hasn't been an area of interest for a lot of people. So we're taking the time, we're doing that research right now. Birds are not a large research model for toxicology. So currently the work that we've done has used mouse cells as the model species. So I do want to put that caveat out there. And the future work that we're going to want to do is going to use bird cells. So.
Well, and to talk to, in layman's terms, to talk about how science actually works is extrapolation. So most of the things that we probably take or put into our bodies, vaccine-wise and pharmaceutical-wise, is all tested on mouse cell lines or other model organisms, is what we call them, and then we extrapolate to what those effects would be in other species.
Right.
So that's a common model. You're not going to find toxicology studies done on a bunch of Amazon parrots, right? Those are not model organisms to use.
Right.
But we also have to, when we're doing research, we're not looking at like all mice who would have very similar effects from one individual to another, because birds, we're talking about parrots in particular, there's a few hundred species, and all of them have evolved and adapted to a variety of different environmental factors. So it's harder to just put a blanket statement for all birds versus something like mice. So that's why we use a model organism like that.
Right, and that's correct. And the line that we used is the line that is used in toxicology research for testing if something causes problems like cancer, if it causes problems in the endocrine system. So we were making sure that
inflammatory conditions.
Yeah, so those inflammatory conditions, correct. We were making sure that we chose that line to be specific to that. And what we saw was levels of acrylamide, like those that are found in bird food, are causing a response. They're causing cells to grow at a much higher rate than without those levels. And sometimes people be like, well, that's great. We want cells to grow faster. But you don't, right?
Yeah. Cancer is when cells grow faster, right? Unchecked and out of control. And I think one of the biggest preliminary findings, and like we're talking preliminary here, this is not published work yet, but when it comes to preliminary findings, we do see interruptions to the cell cycle.
Correct.
And the cell cycle is what most cells go through at some point, where they divide to make new cells and replace older dying cells. And when that is unchecked and it's out of control division, that's what cancer actually is. So we see there's a connection in research between some of these inflammatory compounds and onset of cancer.
That's correct. So we're not saying that one small amount is going to immediately cause cancer, but it's definite that you should use caution, right?
Mm-hmm. So limited exposure.
Limited exposure.
If at all.
That's just like you don't want to eat ultra high processed food 80% of the time for your diet.
Mm-hmm.
You probably don't want to be feeding your animals ultra high processed food 80% or 90 or 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
You want to exercise caution.
Yeah. And what counteracts these things are antioxidants, right? And I know a lot of you have heard the word antioxidant, but scientifically may not know what that really means. I know, and you as well, we were raised in the cereal generation, as I call it. Saturday morning, we were eating our cereal in front of the Saturday morning cartoons, thinking that cereal was enriched and that was great for us. And I remember being a kid saying niacin and riboflavin. I had no idea what those were. I know now, but I had no idea what those were, but those were added to cereal, so it must be healthy, right? But now we know that there's other things that you don't see on a label, that nobody tests for, which are these inflammatory compounds that are a result of the ultra-processed food.
Right.
And so antioxidants are there to counteract this. They're there to clean up the problem causers in cells, for example. We call them free radicals. They're just things that can lead to a lot of other problems, a host of other problems, and those, where do you get antioxidants from?
So there's lots of great places you can get your antioxidants from. Wine, chocolates. You can eat the rainbow, and I don't mean Skittles.
Okay, not for birds. We're not talking about birds here. That's not for birds.
Right. So yeah, don't give your...
Wine is not good for birds.
Don't give your bird a glass of wine.
Even though some birds eat fermented, fruits in the wild. We're not advocating that at all.
But if you're going to your birds, then your birds should be eating the rainbow. And again, not Skittles, right?
Yes.
But making sure that they get those fresh fruits, those fresh vegetables. Making sure that they're getting lots of greens, because that's how they're going to be getting those antioxidants. And antioxidants are the #1 fighter of those free radicals.
Mm-hmm. So whole food.
Yeah,
Whole
not the
food
store.
Yes, but whole foods. Well, you might get them there, right?
I mean, you can get your Whole Foods from Whole Foods.
Yeah, we're not plugging Whole Foods Market.
No.
But fruits and veggies, soaked and sprouted items, anything that's living food, right? And living food is going to have those things in much greater quantities that are more bioavailable. And I don't think we talk enough about bioavailability. Just because you consume a food doesn't mean the nutrients are bioavailable, right? And we see this with vitamin supplements. Like, just because you take a vitamin supplement that's been isolated into a capsule doesn't mean that you're actively absorbing that in a useful way. I think probably the biggest the biggest example of that is vitamin C. Like you can take vitamin C as capsules and you pee a lot of it out because it's just not as absorbable as when you eat vitamin C in food, because there's other compounds there that help your body absorb it.
Right.
So all those antioxidants, where you want to get them from is from whole food. So seeds and nuts have antioxidants, soaked and sprouted items have antioxidants, fruits and veggies have antioxidants. There's a lot of demonization that comes with some of these foods. Like I hear a lot of people saying fruit is all sugar. Is fruit all sugar?
No.
No.
So. And the sugar that is available in fruit is going to be that bioavailable fruit that the birds need.
Yeah, they have a high metabolism, right? So even if they're sitting in a cage, they still have, I mean, their heart hums, so they have greater needs. But you know, the bioflavonoids that are in a lot of fruits, those are great antioxidants. And every time I hear bioflavonoids, I think fruit and flowers with strong color, blueberries, hibiscus flowers, things like that, which you can get both in a tea and brew it like with hibiscus, or you can get as a whole food when it comes to berries and other types of fruits, for example. And then leafy greens, dark leafy greens, things like that are going to have important plant compounds that are going to help keep cells healthy, because the cells are really the foundation, right?
And making sure that you vary them is going to help make sure that you cover that broad spectrum of the antioxidants and bioflavonoids that you need.
And when it comes to, how do I say this? Diversifying the diet. Do birds, really any animal, need 100% of all of that nutrition every single day?
No.
That's really not how nature works, right? That's a little hard for us to understand when we have a pet bird at home and we really want to give it the best, but that's not how nature works.
Right. So it's, you think about kind of like the law of averages, and by the end of the week you want to make sure that you've averaged it out and that you're not really, really high. And
we're not saying do math. We're just saying like offer a variety of things so that you know that they've had some of that, had access to some of those things, yeah. I think vitamin A is probably the most reported deficiency. Once again, antioxidants. And vitamin A, offering beta carotenes in those fruits and vegetables are going to be a way to deliver that.
Right.
So, you also have a background in genetics. And what do things like free radicals and stuff like that, what are those problem causers that come out of ultra processed foods, the results of eating those? How do those affect genetics?
How long do we have?
Yeah, I know.
So
3 minutes.
3 minutes. So the big thing is it's going to decrease, if you're trying to breed your animals, it's going to decrease your ability for breeding pairs to have healthy offspring. And it's also going to have epigenetic effects.
Because they can pass they can pass these problems that come in their genes onto their offspring.
Right. And so it's not going to cause mutations like we think of a normal mutation, but it's going to cause problems epigenetically with the offspring because of nutritional deficits.
So those nutritional deficits can be passed on. But if you're, if you have a pet at home or several birds, I don't remember the last time I just had a single bird. I've always had many birds. But if I'm trying to take good care of them and just give them the best life, how could this affect their own genetics that could manifest in different ways?
So nutritional deficits are going to cause issues with their plumage. They can cause behavioral problems. So you'll actually find that nutritional deficits are going to cause the bad bird problems, where they're going to have behavioral issues such as plucking. They're going to have
hormonal imbalance.
Yeah.
Especially this time of year.
Yeah. I was going to say there's so many issues that a proper nutrition are actually going to take care of. A lot of times people are going to relinquish their birds because they think they've just got a bad bird, and it's,
Or they don't know how to manage the behavior.
yeah, they don't know how to manage the behavior. And the behavior a lot of times is just a result of poor nutrition.
And even though they're told, even by veterinarians often, that they're giving them a complete diet, if the complete diet is mostly processed food, they're giving them more of these inflammatory compounds ultimately.
So, and it's not, even though it's a complete diet, it might not be bioavailable.
So they're lacking. And we see this like, I've done podcasts with Dr. Jamie Abedi, who's a veterinarian in the Chicago area, like where you are, and she has said even birds on largely pelleted diets have vitamin A deficiencies. That's something very common. So it might be on the label, but it doesn't mean they're actually absorbing it.
Right.
So offering that very diverse diet is not only physiologically healthy, but it's also mentally stimulating, right? So there was a paper by the Royal Society, I think it was 2021, called Nature Calls, and they made recommendations, and they said birds should not be on a mostly pelleted diet because they get bored. They can eat all of their nutrients real quick, and then there's no engagement with the environment when most of these birds are spending 3/4 of their time, daily time, foraging. Right? So we know that they've evolved to do that. So offering them a diverse diet has a lot of benefits, but some of that mental stimulation can be impaired genetically.
Right. And it's a lot easier to give them a diverse diet, I think, than people think sometimes. I think sometimes people think it's too hard, it's too challenging, and it's just easier to give them the pellet diet, especially when the vet's like, here, give them this, it's everything they need.
Yeah. Which is that's the really the trap we've fell into over the past several decades with dog and cat food, is that it was a convenience factor, and here you can just feed your dogs and it has everything they need. But resoundingly, we have dogs who are chronically ill. They do not live as long as they should. Cats even worse, right? Cancer, organ failure are major causes. And instead of being proactive and offering them a whole food diet, we then give them a prescription diet, which is made by the same company that ruined their kidneys in the first place. And then we put them on that. And that's a low protein diet. And cats, as you know, are carnivores. They should not be on a low protein diet. So, we're putting Band-Aids on a much larger problem. So what we're trying to do is look at what's really there. How can it impact the animal's wellness? And what recommendations can we make, which have been my recommendations for a long time ultimately, of diversifying the diet and giving them a more diverse whole food diet.
Right.
Yeah. So hopefully this was digestible for you. No pun intended. No
Or
pun intended. But we wanted to talk a little bit when we were together here, and we'll do this again when I'm up in Chicago in July. I'm sure we can talk more about this. But the preliminary findings are very telling. They definitely are confirming what we assume, but we're extrapolating what we know about human nutrition, and we're seeing the same thing. So it shouldn't surprise us really.
Right.
But the chronic mental illness and just overall wellness that we see in our society today in humans can definitely be extrapolated to pets, and so we want to do better.
So eat more whole foods. Give your pets more whole foods.
Yep.
Stay happy, healthy, and safe.
Exactly. So hopefully this was helpful, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.